Evening, everyone. So happy to have you again for this our second autism parent coaching workshop. I invite you to bow your heads as we ask God's presence. Thank you, Heavenly Father, we come to you again today. We acknowledge your lordship, your sovereignty, and we honor and praise you. Again, we present our participants, our presenters, and all persons involved in this workshop, oh God, as we seek to discuss autism parent coaching. Father God, we ask for your guidance and we pray, God, that you will be with us. Father, we also pause at this time to just ask your presence for those children and families, God, who are in the war-torn zone. We ask God that for your intervention. We ask for your mercy. We ask God that you will comfort hearts and that the Holy Spirit will hug these individuals. We also, God, ask that you remember our children here in Jamaica who are going back to school. Oh God, we pray, God, that you will be with each and every one of them. We ask, God, that you will be with the parents and with the teachers, God, as we seek, Lord, to educate in this environment. Father, thank you for what you will be doing. Thank you, Lord, for your presence here in this workshop. And we say this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Mrs. McDonald. Dr. Anderson Morgan.
Thank you, Mrs. Manoff Williams. Thank you, chairperson of this evening's seminar. Parents, caregivers, educators, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my absolute pleasure on behalf of the Michael Child Assessment and Research in Education Center to welcome you to this, the second in a series of workshops specifically for parents of children with autism. But of course, we know our educators are here as well and other stakeholders. This workshop is entitled Understanding, Interpreting, and Managing Autism-Related Challenges, Communication. Okay, please remember to mute your mics. Communication and sensory perspectives. So let me first acknowledge with profound gratitude our partners, the Optimist International Caribbean District, Childhood Health and Response Mission, CHARM. And I really like the acronym CHARM. And I want to welcome Governor Mr. Al Johnson and other members of the team who may be with us this evening. I wish to especially welcome our two presenters for this evening, Miss Karina Lee, who, as you heard before, is a speech and language pathologist, and Dr. Grace Chang, who is an occupational therapist. And they will be introduced to you formally in a little while. Welcome to you all of you who have taken the time out to be with us this evening. We welcome our parents, our caregivers, teachers, educators, members of support groups, and other stakeholders supporting children with autism and their families. This workshop is a direct response to questions posed by parents in the previous workshop. Of course, as Mrs. Manoff Williams said, we're listening and we're responding to the needs of our stakeholders. We are aware that raising a child with autism is for some a daunting task, and we would not want our parents to become so frustrated that this creates barriers to the success for our children. As Temple Grandin said, parents get so worried about the deficits that they don't build up the strengths. And you might ask, who's Temple Grandin? So before you ask Google, let me hasten to say that she is among the top 10 professors in the United States. She holds multiple degrees, including a PhD. She has been featured on renowned television shows like 60 Minutes and Larry King Live, and even has an Emmy Award-winning film made about her. And she is also a person with autism. Dr. Temple Grandin did not speak until she was 3.5 years old and was always seen as weird and socially awkward growing up, although she was not diagnosed with autism until later in life. So how was she able to achieve all her accomplishments despite being labeled brain damaged in the late 1940s when she was born? Her mother worked very hard to create a safe and encouraging environment for her daughter, working with educators and special needs experts. Ladies and gentlemen, we can give our children with autism the best chance for success if we work together, even with limited resources. So, as I welcome you this evening, let us learn all we can. And tomorrow morning, let's start putting them into practice and watch our children thrive. So let's do this because we care. So welcome to one and all, and do have an enriching afternoon. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anderson Morgan, for that very warm welcome. And as always, sharing some very useful information with us. Mr. Al Johnson, sponsor.
Thank you, moderator Anne-Marie Maynard Williams, members of the MicroCare Center, presenters Miss Karina Lee and Dr. Chang, parents, caregivers, stakeholders, interest groups, friends, good afternoon. You know, as a service organization whose focus is on our children and young people, Optimist International Caribbean District is always finding meaningful ways to engage with groups who share in our mission and are working towards that common goal. As friend of youth and members of the Optimist International Service Organization, our goal is to bring out the best in our children, our communities, our clubs, and ourselves. It was therefore fitting that we partnered with the MicroCare Center to find creative ways to positively impact the lives of children who are autistic. As we work to achieve our goals as an Optimist service organization, we also have several planned activities which are executed through our various committees. The Childhood Health and Response Mission Committee, commonly referred to, and you heard it earlier, CHARM committee is one such committee. And in response to the requests from Optimist clubs and recognizing the broad range of childhood health related issues, Optimist International Caribbean District back in 2015 launched the Optimist International Caribbean District Childhood Health and Response Mission. And I love to say it, CHARM. And guided by the district's mandate, clubs within the Caribbean district have the opportunity to initiate projects to assist health and wellness of children in their communities. And one of our area of focus for this CHARM committee is autism. In fact, we have an entire quarter, April to June, which is dedicated to activities focused on autism. In the first quarter, we focus on HIV/AIDS. This quarter, January to March, we're focusing on childhood cancer. April to June is all about autism. And in the fourth quarter, we'll go to lupus. But working in association with the MicroCare unit to put on a parent coaching workshop is a perfect way for us as an Optimist service organization to make our contribution to children living with autism. We applaud the efforts of the MicroCare Center for the continued dedication to and focus on this special group of children and pledge our continued support as we continue to work towards that common goal of impacting lives positively. To the parents and stakeholders here today, benefiting from today's session, we thank you for being here and for allowing us to support you in this way. Have a great session, have a beneficial session, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. We thank Charm for coming on board in support of this wonderful initiative. And I am sure our stakeholders are also thanking you from their living room or wherever they are participating in this session. Thank you again so much, sir. We appreciate you. Okay, we'll now move to the meat of the matter, which is the introduction of our speakers. Shanique Weskar, the floor is now yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure that I introduce the presenters for our second Autism Parent Coaching Workshop. Listening to your comments, we felt we had to have another information session, but this time with a speech pathologist and an occupational therapist. I am very elated to have Miss Karina Lee and Dr. Grace Chang as this afternoon's presenters. Of Jamaican parentage, Miss Karina Lee graduated with her Master's of Science in Speech and Language Pathology from the University of St. Augustine for Health Science. She is currently working in schools, private practice, and online doing telehealth, and has worked in a variety of settings with a diverse population of many ages, diagnoses, languages, and cultures. Karina has always worked in settings where collaboration with other professionals has been important, including occupational therapists, behavior therapists, physical therapists, teachers, parents, and more. Karina believes in helping children from a holistic, neurodiversity affirming approach and collaborating with others for efficiency. She has been mostly working with the pediatric autism population over the last 5 years and specializes in feeding therapy and augmentative and alternative communication, AAC. She is very passionate about educating families and other family support members on how best to improve their child's functional communication skills, feeding, and social skills in order to improve communication skills in order improve the child's and family's overall quality of life. I must add that Ms. B has been a great source of resource for the center over the past year. She reached out to us and offered to help in whatsoever way she could, despite her distance, because she's located overseas. And she has really stayed true to that commitment, not only providing us with valuable resources, but insights on ways and approaches to meeting the needs of children we see with speech delays. Our second presenter is Dr. Grace Chang, who graduated with her doctorate degree in occupational therapy from Nova Southern Eastern University in 2021. In behavior and health at Boston University in 2016. She has experience working at a school setting for children diagnosed with autism and an early intervention program designed as a parent-child class for children with developmental delays, ages 18 to 36 months. She also has experience working with a variety of other diagnoses and specializes in feeding difficulties and sensory processing disorder, inpatient and outpatient settings. Dr. Chang currently works at an outpatient pediatric clinic. Her professional goal is to work closely with family members and provide client-centered care for her patients to promote participation in a meaningful occupation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have quite a lot to cover tonight, and I just want to encourage you to remove all forms of distraction. Make sure you make note of your questions or write them in the chat, and help me in welcoming tonight's presenter.
Is this me, Ms. Weskar? I have a
Yes.
question. Are we trying to finish by 6:30 and then do a half hour for questions?
Present. We will work with you.
Okay.
But the aim is to try and finish so that persons can ask questions.
Gotcha. All right. So we have a lot of information to cover tonight. Let me share my screen. Okay, so the goal of this presentation today is to change the way you think about the behaviors of your autistic children. So as a speech pathologist, I interpret all behavior as a message to communicate something. Dr. Chang, as an occupational therapist that has a great understanding of the sensory system, interprets many behaviors as fulfilling or avoiding a sensory experience. So we want to teach you and give you the tools on how to interpret different behaviors to help improve your children's communication and help to regulate their sensory systems. So this is just an overview of everything we'll be going over today. I'll be doing communication, Dr. Chang will be doing sensory, and then we'll both be working on the feeding part. The reason you don't have a specialized feeding therapist covering the feeding part is because all feeding therapists are speech or occupational therapists. So I'm squeezing in a lot of information from different classes in graduate school into a 1-hour presentation. So this is going to be recorded, but I encourage you to read the slides, listen, take notes, take screenshots, write down any questions, comments, concerns you have. Okay, so in the previous workshop, I also heard your frustrations about the lack of available, resourceful, and good quality services in Jamaica, and I'm sure in most of the Caribbean. But I do applaud you all for educating yourselves in order to figure out how best to help your autistic children. Children need to be taught, but it's the parents, the families, and their support systems that need to be taught as well. So it is up to us to learn how to accommodate our children with special needs, not for our children with special needs to accommodate to us. Can everybody please make sure that your microphones are on mute?
Miss it mute.
Okay. All right, so now I know you know what autism is, and we talked about changing the way you think about behaviors, but I also want to give you a different way of looking at autism as well. So simply speaking, autism just affects how someone sees, experiences, and interacts with the world. Their sensory system and difficulty with social communication is the cause for the 3 characteristics needed for diagnosis that you can see over here on the right. So autistic people are considered to have neurocognitive differences, which give them distinct strengths and weaknesses, and are capable of succeeding when appropriately accommodated and supported. 1 in every 44 people are autistic. Autistic children become autistic adults because autism is not a disease. It does not go away. This is also why you'll be hearing me use identity first language, saying autistic child, autistic people, and not child with autism, such as I am a woman, not just a woman with female anatomy. So autism affects their whole living experience. And again, they just simply need the tools to succeed. Okay, so let's get into the communication portion. So first and foremost, I want to explain speech is not the only means of communication. There is reading, there's writing, there's signing, there's gesturing, there's facial expressions, there's body language, there's pictures, there's symbols. So verbal communication might be the hope and priority, but communication does come in many forms. The goal is for our children to communicate functionally, not specifically for speech. So when teaching any child how to communicate, you want to target functional language. So autistic children tend to understand and express less functional language first, like colors and numbers and the alphabet and whatever somebody is showing them on flashcards or whatever their special interest is. Like I have worked with a child that knew every vocabulary word about astronomy, but could not answer a simple question. So we want to focus on functional language. So this means everyday household items, verbs, actions, favorite foods, favorite toys, yes and no, this and that, and common phrases. Okay, so you want to use them frequently. This means please and thank you are not a priority, neither are names. So names, labeling animals they might never interact with shouldn't be a priority unless they love animals and that's what motivates them. So you want to focus on functional language and model it for them as well. So they explained in the previous workshop as well, you want to narrate what is happening, you want to comment on what they're seeing, you want to model language that they can use, and you want to use multiple modalities when doing so. And by multiple modalities, I mean not just speaking, but gesturing, writing things down, showing them visuals. So receptively, what you understand, you might find that your autistic child's comprehension fluctuates depending on their surroundings, their actions, what they're doing at the current time, their mood, or even the time of day. So you want to try and figure out when and how your child is most alert and cooperative, and try to recreate some of those elements when trying to speak and communicate with them. Eye contact can be very uncomfortable for a lot of autistic people, but others may understand better when looking at your face. So we'll get into more of the sensory part with Dr. Chang, but some autistic kids might comprehend better when fidgeting, when swaying, when jumping, or moving instead of just sitting quietly at a table. And that goes for all kids, not just autistic kids. Some may communicate better in the swing, in a bathtub, or in the car. You want to investigate and make note and try to recreate some of those elements. So also, even if you think your child might be too young, I also advise you to test out your child's ability to recognize letters or to read. Some autistic children are hyperlexic. Hyperlexia is defined as advanced and unexpected reading skills and abilities in children way beyond their chronological age. So if your child has a fascination or almost obsession with the alphabet and letters, they might start reading faster than you think without even having to teach them. So I worked with an autistic 4-year-old and for months, and one day the back of the flashcard was on the table and he read it instead of looking at the other side with the pictures. And when I asked his parents, they said they had absolutely no idea that he could read. But after I realized that he had self-taught himself how to read, the way that I taught him language completely had to change. He was not strong in auditory information, but he was a very good visual learner, and not just pictures and symbols, but words as well at 4 years old. Also, if your child has really good fine motor movements, good with their hands, if they love to dance or imitate things they see on TV, I want you to look into baby sign language or make up some of your own adapted signs to communicate with your child. You can model it for them as you use the verbal word as well, and you can help form their hands and fingers to make the signs as well. But we'll also get more into that in the alternative communication section. So expressively, autistic children have very specific expressive language traits. If they are verbal, they may use a lot of jargon, which is just nonsense language where they're just blah, 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 going on. They might script, which is where they seem to imitate lines from like a TV show or something like that. Or they might use echolalia, which is when they repeat things. Can everybody please put your microphones on mute? Okay, or they might be non-speaking right now. Again, I know the hope is for speech, but if speech is going to come, it is going to come on their own time, If you are trying to force speech, it might not be the best because you might not know why they are not using speech. So besides the difficulty to use language as a whole, there are other speech disorders that coincide with autism. Sometimes there are oral motor difficulties. So if they have difficulty manipulating the food in the mouth, if they're spilling things out of their mouth, if they get tired from chewing, they physically might not be able to have the strength and coordination to produce speech. There's also apraxia, which is a motor planning disorder. They might want to speak and have every intention to speak, but the connection from their brain to their mouth is not allowing them to produce speech. And apraxia coexists with kids that don't have autism too. So unfortunately, oral motor difficulties and apraxia are too complex, if not studied in depth, to identify and diagnose and treat. But other reasons your child might not be using speech is simple social anxiety. It might be much easier for them to communicate in another way, or simply because they just choose not to speak. So continue using your speech always. If they have some verbalizations, you can continue to try to elicit speech from them. But if they are completely not producing any speech and their speech does not progress, you definitely have to incorporate other modalities. And this is where the alternative communication comes in. Also, this is a link right here to the right, teacherspayteachers.com. If you need a visual, ideas, worksheets, anything, Teachers Pay Teachers probably has something. You can filter it so that you're searching for autism related resources. You can search it or filter it for specific free resources, but there's a ton of things on there. So use that website. Okay, so AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, which is basically just a fancy way of saying all the ways to communicate besides talking without using words or verbal words. So here's an example of some of the most common practical forms of AAC today. So as previously discussed, you want to find the right AAC method to use instead of speech or to supplement your child's speech depending on their strengths. So they need good fine motor skills to use sign language. Okay, so over here, this is baby sign language. So it's not a real language, but it's adapted signs that a lot of people will use with babies or toddlers. So you can adapt some of your own signs to communicate with them as well. So they need good fine motor skills for that. They need a little less, but also some fine motor skills to push a button on a high-tech communication device or to point to symbols. So as you can see down here. They need some fine motor skills for low-tech communication design, low-tech devices such as the flip book that you see here, and using Velcro. So they have to peel it off and stick it back on. So lots of trial and error, and whatever seems to motivate your child the most to learn is good to take into consideration as well. You want to mix and match as well, see what works. You can sign for some things and then indicate with symbols for other things. For sign language, I'm not sure how popular JSL, Jamaican Sign Language, is over there versus ASL, American Sign Language, but both languages are options. As mentioned, there's also baby sign language. So in these pictures, like I said, we have more and drink. I also frequently use other ones like toy, swing, and things like that. You can make up your own. There are tons of free resources on the internet to learn signs. If you are committed to JSL or ASL, remember that the child cannot be the only one using this language system. The people that your child interacts with too also need to use these systems. So picture communication boards are probably the most popular low-tech form over here, as they can be used to communicate with anybody, not just those who know sign language. Low-tech can be free or cheap, but of course it's a lot harder to edit and change things. There are tons of high-tech options for dedicated devices, but they are very expensive. And by dedicated, I mean a device solely used for communication. So it's not just the house iPad tablet. So here in the US, insurance will typically cover it if the child has a clear need and diagnosis, but you all would probably benefit from something more simple like an iPad or some kind of tablet with an application. So there are many free versions for you to try out before you buy one. The free low-tech communication board I posted on this link over here. It has the exact same symbols as the one in the high-tech apps that I've listed. So you can always try the low-tech first and then move up to a high-tech one if you're unsure about paying for it and going that route. And you can see how your child does with it. So the main difference is the high-tech will produce speech for the child. So they'll press a button and it will say what they pressed. Low-tech, of course, you're just pointing and the person has to see and understand what you're saying. So I could do a whole other presentation on AAC. It is very, very complex, but please do your research on how to get started, what field size to use, why motor planning is important. You want to start off with a small enough field, but not too small because you don't want to be changing the size very often. Because for example, if somebody changed your keyboard around, it would be extremely frustrating to get your message across. Okay, so here's a simple example of using both speech and visuals, or AAC, with a 3-year-old autistic girl. So she counts and labels colors very frequently, but she rarely uses other functional language and she's not really putting two words together.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I see 7 orange bears. I see.
So you can see, I mean, because she likes colors and numbers so much, we use this visual to try to get her to use I see at the beginning. So every page has a different animal, different color, different number, and it starts with I see. So because she likes these colors and numbers so much, this is what we're using to motivate her. And I'm also saying I see, pointing to myself and my eyes, and using the number, color, and animal. So towards the end, eventually you hear her say, I see. It's a little unclear as she's turning the page, but we incorporate that same phrase to comment on other things throughout the day. I see mommy, I see yummy food. So she learns the phrase I see and can incorporate then numbers and colors as well.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So
Okay, so now we're going to talk about echolalia. So echolalia is the precise repetition or echoing of words or sounds said by another person. I know you know what it is, especially if your child does it. If your child does this, you know exactly what it is. But you also need to really fully understand it to learn how to change the echolalia into robust and more flexible functional language. You don't want to get rid of the echolalia, you want to adapt it. So when we say echolalia, we're typically referring to immediate echolalia. So do you want a drink? Can be followed by, do you want a drink? Or sometimes they might just reply with drink. And of course, this can be extremely frustrating as you're not sure what they're trying to communicate, especially when we ask a question. But for immediate echolalia, my best advice is to avoid open-ended questions. You can model it as a sentence instead. So I want to drink, and then have them point to what they want and then model it for them. So, oh, I would like some orange juice, point to that. So now they're repeating something more functional for that specific situation. So echolalia is just a stepping stone to get to more flexible functional language. So eventually the echolalia becomes delayed and it won't be used immediately, but it will be used at a later time. And it has many, many purposes as listed over here. So to ask for things, to start or keep an interaction going, to draw attention to something, to protest, to answer yes, and sometimes just to self-talk, self-soothe, or to rehearse. So when the repetition is delayed or not immediate, it can be called delayed echolalia. However, it is also be called scripting because it seems as though the child is speaking with a script. Usually that's when you hear them saying something they heard earlier from a TV show. So now, because there has become a lot of new good research that shows that this is just a part of how autistic children acquire and learn language, it is called Gestalt language processing. So they learn the melody and intonation of a phrase rather than focusing on each individual word like most people learn. This is true for a lot of autistic children, but it's also typical of second language learners as well. So for example, I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic area in Miami. I did not speak any Spanish. And when I was growing up in school, I frequently remember getting told, cállate la boca. So, and this was always said to me when I was in class and when I was talking and I knew I was not supposed to be talking. I had no idea what that meant or what exactly it translated to, but I knew it meant that my teacher did not want me to talk and was mad at me when she said that. So eventually, when my friends annoyed me, I might tell them, cállate la boca. Or to be feisty, I might have uttered it under my breath when my mother, who definitely doesn't speak Spanish, made me upset. And I learned this gestalt in one context and learned to adapt it into other contexts. So eventually I learned cállate means you be quiet, and la boca is the mouth. And then I was able to take that gestalt I learned and adapt it into new phrases as I learned more vocabulary. So la boca es grande, the mouth or your mouth is big, or cállate ahora, which is you be quiet now. So I was able to inference what this phrase meant and adapt it as I learned. Because autistic kids struggle with communication, they need you to adapt to the way they learn in order for you to teach them how to improve their communication. So you can improve a Gestalt language processor's language by listening and acknowledging, modeling the language by what you think they want to say. You can also learn their gestalts or their scripts and learn to adapt them into different scenarios. So take things from their favorite TV shows, use those to your advantage. They're going to want to repeat those things more. And you can also introduce new gestalts during their preferred activities and interests that can be mixed and matched later. I don't have time to go through all of these different stages, but take a screenshot, look this up later. If you believe your child is a Gestalt language processor, it would be very beneficial for you to learn more about this. It explains how echolalia becomes mitigated, how the words isolate and recombine into new phrases, and how they eventually become self-generated grammar. I've also included a story on this link down here, which explains what this author calls natural language acquisition. Her name is Marge Blank, and any book or article that she has written will be a great read. And also this website here, meaningfulspeech.com, explains a lot of that further as well. Okay, so this video shows an older and verbal AAC user who has difficulty using spontaneous language. So he does speak, but he also has a communication device. So when he is prompted, he can use a few words to label things or situations, such as the boy is riding a bike. However, other than that, he uses a lot of lines from TV shows and has frequent immediate echolalia. So he rarely initiates or communicates or continues communication. So he would not tell me that boy is riding a bike unless I asked him, what is he doing? So he has to be asked a question to say pretty much anything. So he has a high-tech dedicated speech generating device. The device is typically used for others to model language for him in order to prompt him to use language and to decrease that repetition of the immediate echolalia. Okay, so I don't want to start and stop the video to explain, but just follow along as the video progresses. So I'm going to explain here and then down here.
Let's find a
star, red star first.
red star. Okay, let's
Wait.
find the red star. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Where's baby?
Where's the red star?
Red star. Where's the red?
Where is it?
Where is
Where
it?
is it?
Matthews, do you want
No.
Go.
do you want help?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Let me see if I can.
Mom. I got it.
I got it. Good job. High five.
Okay, so you can see we're using multiple modalities. We're using gestures, speech, AAC. I'm being very exaggerated. We're using functional language and doing an activity he likes. He likes to sort and he likes colors. And we're acknowledging, modeling, and adapting his gestalts and echolalia.
Let's find
Okay, so I know the language portion was a lot of information, but I'll end this communication portion with something a little simpler. So this is pragmatics and social skills. Now, a lot of this depends on your child's age. For younger children that haven't established much language and have little interest in other people, please wait for Dr. Chang's explanation on the stages of play as well as sensory play. Play is very important for that population of children. Children need to have more developed receptive and expressive language, executive functioning, and self-regulation skills before they can truly develop more pragmatic and social skills. Now, autistic people generally need to be taught social skills. Like they do other skills that they do not easily pick up on. You may have picked up on interrupting others as rude, but autistic people may not understand the social concept of being rude. So in turn, they might not see the issue of interrupting. So when you try to teach a skill, you must first introduce it. So social stories are my favorite thing to use with children. You can search social stories on that Teachers Pay Teachers website, or you can Google some or find from a video social story. Social stories are told in a specific format so that the reader can better understand perspectives and viewpoints of others. So you can use a social story to explain interrupting. Then you can define the skill, explain how not to interrupt, and take turns. You can create a visual prompt of questions to have them ask themselves before speaking. So is this an emergency? Is this person already speaking to somebody else? How can I get the person's attention? Say, excuse me, smile at the person and wait. And then you want to practice actually using this skill. You can role play not interrupting or using appropriate times or figuring out when appropriate times to interrupt is okay, or what to say when you absolutely do need to interrupt. And you can practice different role-playing situations with peer models. You can watch a video demonstration demonstrating a conversation where a person waits their turn to speak. And then finally, you want to generalize the skill in multiple settings and seek out conversations with a variety of people. You can do this for any social skill that your child needs to be taught. Social stories are also great ways to help prepare your autistic kids for unknown events. So for example, if they have never been to the dentist before, that find the dentist traumatizing, you can search a dentist social story, and reading it to them might be a great way to help them understand what to expect when they go to the dentist, why they are there, and what they should do. Because autistic people generally like predictability. They like to know and prepare for what's going to happen. All right, now I'm going to allow Dr. Chang to explain the sensory portion of this presentation.
Thank you, Karina, for the first half of this presentation. So I will be sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see my screen? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so
Yes, you can.
I'm sorry? You can see my screen. I think that's what I heard. So I will be going into the sensory system. So occupational therapists are specialized in interpreting children and their sensory systems, where a lot of people know the basic sensory systems that are more common, which are smell, auditory, vision, tactile, and taste. But occupational therapists look further into what's called the vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoceptive systems that help us understand why our kids are behaving certain ways that can be harder for us to understand. So I'll go into the different systems and explain to you how each are related to our kiddos. Sorry, this is really sensitive too. Okay, so as everyone knows, the auditory system is how we are reacting to different sounds in our environment, detecting sounds, interpreting whether a sound is really loud or really quiet, interpreting language, which is very important to communication. Tactile system is how we are detecting touch. So some of our kids, might be more sensitive to the tags, the labels in the back of our shirts, and they might not like it. They might not be aware of different textures. They might not be as aware to pain. So tactile system goes into, how our skin is interpreting different things that we're touching. The olfactory system is how our brain is interpreting smell. So all the different odors that are in our environment. Sometimes kids may be more sensitive to the smell and not like certain perfumes, and it might make them a little bit more sensitive or emotional. Taste is, how we enjoy certain foods or how we don't need certain foods. It can also go into letting our body know, are we thirsty? Are we not thirsty? Our visual system is responsible for how we see, detect objects, shapes, colors, orientation, and motion. So these next three sensory systems are a little newer, so I'm going to go into them a little deeper. So the proprioceptive system is the system responsible for sensing position, location, and orientation, movement of the body's muscles and joints, detecting where our body parts are in space relative to other parts and how much effort we use to move our body parts. So, neurotypical children may be aware that they are standing next to a child in a specific proximity. Autistic kids, they might not be aware of how close they are and might be constantly running into kids or pushing kids because that proprioceptive sensory system is not really, working in a way where they're aware of where their body is in space. Our vestibular system is how our brain is processing the rocks in our ears. So it senses the balance, orientation in space. It informs us about movement, rotation, position of our head relative to gravity. It influences our posture, our hand-eye movement, and breathing. So some people may be very nauseous when they're riding the car because their vestibular system is a little bit more sensitive to motion, whereas other people can go on a boat and they're fine, and they can be perfectly not nauseous and participate in different activities because their vestibular system is able to interpret that sensory and they're able to adapt and be okay. The last one is the interoceptive system. So it's responsible for detecting and interpreting internal senses that inform us about our physiology and what our internal organs are feeling. So it's letting our body know that we're hungry, we're thirsty, we're tired, we're nausea, we're, excited, or, we need to breathe. It's our basic needs and understanding of knowing, how to interpret our body and what it needs. So what is sensory integration dysfunction? So a lot of autistic children have a hard time processing the different sensory inputs in their environment. So how is their brain taking that sensory input from the external environment? How is it going into their brain? How is it being inputted into their brain? And what can their brain do before they have to, have an output in their actions? So this is a flow chart of how we can help understand what's the input and output actually look like. So there is a sensory input that the child faces from their external environment. They are more likely to have inefficient sensory registration, meaning their brain is neurologically having a harder time registering that sensory input. They're not understanding it. The brain is very confused of what they're feeling, what they're seeing, what their, interoceptive system is telling. Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? And therefore it leads to sensory integration dysfunction. They're unable to process that information, and there's almost a like a block in their neural pathways that make it difficult for them to participate in their higher functioning activities. It leads to inefficient higher center function. So I'll go into more detail with how our sensory processing difficulties of interpretation can lead to difficulties with higher functioning. So how can our behavior be affected by sensory processing? So like I said, our sensory system is first getting the information into our brain, and then our brain decides what we're going to do with that sensory processing. Usually neurotypical kids, they will have an appropriate response. They will have an appropriate motor response, but sometimes the brain doesn't know what to do. So it can lead to a lot of emotional and behavioral challenges because they are so sensitive, or they are not getting that feedback, and yet their teachers or their parents, because they might have a harder time understanding about what their child is feeling, they can it can lead to, kids having a little bit of a trauma or just, feeling like they're being misinterpreted, misunderstood for something that they are not really in control of. So I'm going to go into the difference between tantrums versus meltdowns. So tantrums tend to be a little bit more behavioral. So, they might be upset, they might start throwing things, but usually you can catch on to know if it's a tantrum or not, because the kid will look to see if the parent or the teacher's watching what they're doing, or they're looking for a reaction to see how they can manipulate the situation to get what they want. They're able to communicate their wants and their needs, and they're usually able to calm down. They will not hurt themselves. However, kids who are having a hard time processing their sensory system, they're more prone to having meltdowns. Meltdowns are different from tantrums because it's neurological. It's a physiological response. Their body goes into fight or flight, and they cannot. They have a harder time calming down. It is not for attention. They tend to be more unaware of their surroundings, and they become very dysregulated. Even if the issue is resolved, they will keep going. They will still be crying on the floor, kicking. They will still be crying. And it might take sometimes 30 minutes to an hour for these kids to calm down, and it can get very dangerous. They might, be in a position where they can get hurt. So the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown, it's very important for parents to read their child and kind of interpret, is this kid doing it on purpose? Are they being, behavioral to get what they want, or are they really having a hard time coping and calming down and getting their body in a state where they're more relaxed to be able to talk about their emotions, to be able to understand, I did this because of this. This was wrong because of that. So this is going into the details of our different sensory systems and how it can look if our children do have difficulties with sensory processing. So like I mentioned earlier, the proprioceptive system, it's how your body is interpreting different, it's interpreting different where your body is in space, how it's interpreting, squeezes, how it's interpreting your muscles and your joints. So kids who have a difficulty with proprioceptive processing, they might always want to be held or carried. They prefer to be hugged really tightly. They're pushing a lot of kids. They're floppy, they're falling down a lot. They're never just walking, they're skipping, they're running, they're stomping their feet. Those are some of the red flags to know that they are having a difficult time processing their proprioceptive system. Vestibular processing difficulties can lead to having a difficult time with their balance. They might be falling a lot. They're constantly moving. They don't sit still. Kids, autistic kids have a hard time sitting and attending. And like Karina mentioned, sometimes it doesn't work. It's because their vestibular system is constantly needing that movement, that input for these kids to be able to feel regulated to sit down. They'll, have a floppy body. They'll love to hang upside down. Vision difficulties can lead to kids always, not wanting to be around flashing lights, shifting their eyes or their gaze. Smell, like I mentioned earlier, they might not prefer certain scents or odors or specific foods, which we'll go into later. Kids with tactile defensive behaviors, they will avoid certain things. They might not like to touch certain, materials, certain textures. They might not like to do messy play. Shoes, socks, clothes have to be a specific texture or fit. They refuse to wear certain clothing. Sometimes kids just like to be, walking around without any clothes because their tactile system is so much more sensitive. Auditory processing difficulties can lead to kids having a hard time in loud environments. You might see them covering their ears in certain busy environments, or they might have a harder time hearing, and they might not be as aware of how to discriminate when someone's calling their name because they're so distracted by the auditory inputs in their environment. Oral sensory difficulties can lead to kids craving specific tastes, whether it's spicy, salty, sour. They may be very oral seeking, so they might always be putting stuff in their mouth, wanting to chew things, usually non-edible items. They might lick everything. They might bite themselves or other people. They might gag for certain textures, become picky eaters, and toothbrushing will be very, very stressful for parents, or going to the dentist will also be more difficult because these kids can be so sensitive with what's going inside their mouth. So I'm going to briefly go over this because I want to make this as concise as possible. Sensory processing disorder, there's two different categories. So either they are hypersensitive, hyper the prefix meaning they want more, or hyposensitive, hypo meaning less, which means they're not registering that sensory input enough. Then they need more of it to be in a regulated state. So kids who are hypersensitive, you'll see them, seeking that input, doing actions to get more of that input. So if they're orally hypersensitive, they'll want to put things in their mouth. If they're hyposensitive, then they won't want anything in their mouth. If they're hypersensitive to their vestibular system, you're going to see them constantly moving and running around, having a hard time sitting because they're seeking that movement, that vestibular input. If they're hyposensitive to vestibular input, you'll see that their arousal is really low and they'll have a rounded posture. They'll sit with, their head on the table. They're not really attentive. And so what can we do? What can we do to help these kids be in a regulated state with their sensory systems? So if they're hypersensitive, they're seeking input, you can give them different calming strategies. Of course, it's dependent on what sensory system is being affected, but usually, for kids who are seeking movement, you can give them strategies like squeezing their arms and their legs, giving them deep squeezes, rocking them in a slow linear movement, and giving them white noise in the background where it's calming and it's more regulating. That'll help get these kids to have an easier time to sit down and attend because they're not as hypersensitive, they're more modulated and they're regulated. If they're hyposensitive, now if they're having a harder time attending because they're more sluggish and they're not getting enough, their brain isn't interpreting the movement, that means you have to give them more of that movement. You need to give them a sensory rich environment, including swinging, fast swinging, giving them a lot of movement, jumping and crashing. And these are all different ways that kids are getting sensory input so that they can be in a state of mind to be participating in these functional activities. Interoception sensitivity. So kids who have a harder time interpreting interoception, they are more prone to having a hard time being potty trained. Bedwetting accidents are more common. They have a hard time. They may yell a lot louder. Their voice might be a little softer because they cannot grade. They don't have that voice modulation of understanding how loud they are, how soft they are. They might not know that they're hungry. They might not know that their body temperature is way too high or way too low, or they can be easily distracted by internal body functions. So different sensory integration strategies that occupational therapists use, it's obviously based off of how the kid is with their actions. We read and determine if they need the sensory input or they need less of the sensory input. Can we change the environment? But, some of the activities that are very, very great for kids include jumping on the trampoline, running, rolling on the trampoline, helping carry groceries, pushing, those are signaling the brain because it's activating their proprioceptive input. It's pushing on their joints, activating those muscles to increase that ability for the brain to process the sensory input so that they are calmer, they are more regulated. Bath times for kids who seem to be more regulated in the water is really good. You can give them different types of straws when they're drinking. It's good for oral relaxation. So for kids who are constantly putting things in their mouth, You can give them straws when they're, drinking juice or smoothies. That'll help kind of decrease that oral seeking behavior. If your child is able to follow yoga poses, that's also really beneficial to kids. It's very relaxing. It teaches them to focus on their breathing and just be in a more relaxed state of mind. Tactile input, which I will go into later, you can use drawing, painting, Play-Doh, sand, rice, shaving cream to include tactile play. You can also, for kids who are having a hard time falling asleep, I know a lot of autistic kids, parents will tell me they're waking up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., and they can't fall asleep. You can try tight fitted sheets, tuck those sheets in really tight and see if it helps. Give them a weighted blanket, or give, sometimes aromatherapy helps kids, or using calmer colors in the bedroom, changing the external environment. Those are all different strategies that can be helpful. So some parents are very, curious about stimming behavior. So self-stimulatory behavior is also known as stimming, and it's the repetition of physical movements, sounds, or movement of objects. And it's common in kids who have autism. They are, seen to flap their arms, jump, snap their fingers, and it's all forms of being able to calm themselves and stimulate themselves, or they can use it to express their thoughts or feelings. So, I'm having a hard time having a kid attend to a tabletop activity because they're stimming, they're rolling their car back and forth, and that's what they want to do, or they're, holding a pen and they're shaking it on the side of their head, and that's what they're super focused on, and they're stimming, they're stimulating themselves with these different actions. But sometimes, we have to learn to either work with them or give alternative strategies to help redirect it. So giving sensory approaches, like deep squeezes, like I mentioned, giving them a chewy, or incorporating it into obstacle courses that are providing a rich sensory input where, for example, going back with a car, if a kid is very fixed on rolling a car back and forth, how can I incorporate it into my session? Sometimes, there's parents who will draw lines or roads that are in the shape of letters, and the kid will, roll the car in the line of the letters. So yes, they're stimming, they're still participating in the stimulatory behavior, but you can incorporate it into academic tasks, or, like a goal, that you're working on. You can incorporate these stimming behaviors so that they're not throwing a fit if you take it away. Social stories, like Karina mentioned earlier, is a great way to have kids more aware of what may be socially appropriate, and what, you can alternative ways to stimulate themselves in an environment where there are other people around. Decreasing visual or auditory stimuli, using headphones that can kind of help decrease the stimming behaviors, and incorporating it into functional play, like I mentioned earlier. So creating an autism accessible home is very important. I'm realizing that we are really short on time. So if you guys can go back into these notes and read these specific ways, you can change the environment to help these kids be a little bit more regulated and a little bit more understanding of what's next, less, just not off guard about what may be going on. I will go into sensory play a little later. So there's different play skills that our children go through. There's a hierarchy of play, and I'll just go into them very briefly. Unoccupied play is like toddlers. When you see babies roaming around, they're not really playing. They're kind of just like exploring things, putting things in their mouth, touching things. Solitary play is when kids are starting to play on their own. Onlooker play is when kids start to look in their environment and see, oh, there's another kid playing nearby, but they won't really approach them. They'll kind of just look. Parallel play is when they're playing with the same thing in the same vicinity. So if, there's two kids who are playing in the same sensory bin and they're next to each other and they're doing their own thing, but they're still, participating in functional play side by side, that's where parallel play comes in. And then associative play is when there is that connection where kids are playing with other kids, taking turns, asking them, do you want this? Do you want that? That's associative play. The highest play skill in the hierarchy is cooperative play, which is when there is an ultimate goal. So soccer, the ultimate goal is to get the ball into the goal. Like there's a goal and there's an understanding amongst each other of what the end goal is of that play. That's the last stage of play. And kids, autistic kids, they have a harder time understanding these levels of play and developing their play skills. So, as therapists, we try to give them resources to help them play with other friends. And the basic level would be having them pass the ball to someone. It works on knowing that someone is there, the eye contact, that engagement. Another idea that has worked beautifully is having them have visuals of my turn and stop or wait. So we have our kids hold these little signs that either say my turn or stop. And when it's my turn, you have them actively play, have the other kid hold the stop sign and wait. When it's time to switch turns, they switch the sign so they have an understanding of, oh, now it's my turn to stop and the other kid's turn to play. Kids, are more visual learners. So little things like that are really helpful in helping them build their play skills and going up that hierarchy. Okay, Karina, I believe it's you. That's next.
You have to.
Want me to stop sharing, or do you want me to just go to the next slides for you?
Yeah, that works. Okay. So we're going to talk about pediatric feeding disorder. So a feeding disorder is not an eating disorder. An eating disorder is a mental psychological issue. An eating disorder is not really about the food, but rather a coping mechanism gone wrong. So a feeding disorder is physical, not mental. And it's often more the direct result of food preferences or perceived intolerances. So autistic children struggle with, lots of autistic children struggle with feeding in some way, shape, or form, because common autistic traits, like I mentioned before, is liking predictability and sameness. So a goldfish cracker, for example, tastes the same every single time. A banana is different every time you eat it. It can be green, it can be yellow, it can have black spots, it can have no spots, it can be a milder flavor one day, a stronger flavor another day, it could be squishy, it could be more firm, you can eat it peeled, you can mush it, you can put it in a smoothie. So there's a lot of uncertainty with eating. So in this section, we're going to discuss the types of feeding disorders. So you can see at the top, there are 4 listed here: physiological, oral motor or oral processing difficulties, selective or restrictive eating, which is also picky eating, and then behavioral feeding problems. Some quick tips I've mentioned here: try to establish some kind of routine around feeding so they know when to expect to eat, when washing their hands means it's over. Do not take away preferred food. So even if they're only eating chicken nuggets, don't take it away because that's their safe food. Do not force feed them. I know it can be frustrating that your child is not eating, but do not hold them down and force feed them. If you create trauma around feeding, they're more likely to develop an eating disorder. Do not try to be sneaky. So don't sneak things in there without them knowing, so that if their safe food is cheese sandwiches, you don't want to one day put peanut butter in there so they freak out and feel upset that it's not cheese. And of course, avoid arbitrary rules. So don't create a problem where there isn't one. So if you want the whole family to sit down and eat together, don't make it a huge issue if your child wants to eat in the corner by themselves. You have to pick your battles. Okay, next slide. Okay, so physiologic feeding issues. I don't really have much tips for this one. If your child is showing any physiological issues, they need to go see a professional. You cannot handle this on your own. There's something else going on in their body, and they need to go see their pediatrician, a dietitian, a gastroenterologist, or an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. Okay, so now we're going to go into oral motor and oral processing. So Dr. Chang had mentioned kind of what oral processing is, when they're either oral seeking or avoidance of things being in their mouth or even around their mouth. So if your child is sensory seeking, you can give them a replacement for chewing or sucking on their fingers, their clothes. There's a ton of chew accessories, as they call them, on the internet to give you ideas. You can also use gum or crunchier foods that take longer to chew, celery, carrots, crunchy things like that. If they're sensory avoidant, you want to slowly desensitize them. You want to start with light touching of the cheeks and the lips. You can do it for 1 second and eventually build up to longer, a few more seconds, and then you can apply stronger pressure. You can do a soft toothbrush for a couple seconds, and then eventually they'll be able to brush for 10 seconds and then longer. And then maybe even like a vibrating toothbrush. So, I mean, the way you think of it, I always say, is think of spicy food. A lot of children are not born wanting spicy food or food of hot temperatures, but you've eventually learned to tolerate it. And then eventually you might even learn to like it. For oral motor difficulties, you have to figure out what the issue is before you can help fix it. But in general, I can give you some few tips. Get rid of pacifiers and get rid of bottles with nipples and sippy cups if they are of age. You want to focus on straws and open cups. That helps with the development of their oral motor skills better. And once they are of age, you're actually hindering their oral motor skills by still giving them bottles with nipples and the pacifier. So in general, if they're having difficulty chewing, you want to put small pieces of food on their back molars to help facilitate the chew. If it's coming into the front of their mouth, they might have difficulty moving the food to the back. So give them small pieces, have them put it on the back. You can help prompt them to chew. So show them this, or tell them to chew, or touch over here. You can rub the outside of their cheeks, and you want to help them avoid pocketing. So pocketing is when they keep the food in their cheeks or store it, kind of like a chipmunk. They might just keep it in there and not chew or do anything with it, or they might chew it but then not swallow it, and it'll just sit there. Pocketing isn't always due to oral motor issues, but I mean, it could be because they can't clear the mouth, they can't move their tongue to move it down and swallow it. But it might also be due to oral processing. They might want to keep the flavor in there or the texture, or they could just be really distracted doing other things. But if you want to improve their oral motor skills, you want to follow the developmental food continuum, which is next. Okay, so you do not want to jump to one of the later foods in the hierarchy if they haven't mastered being able to manipulate and swallow one of the ones before. So you have hard munchables. This is for food exploration only. So hard foods that they cannot bite on, and it's not supposed to be small pieces. They're big foods that just for exploring. So like a big carrot, they're not going to be able to chew it, but they're learning to taste the texture, and they're exploring, and they're pushing their gag reflex back by just moving it around their mouth. This is what babies do. Eventually, you move on to meltable hard solids. So it has a defined texture to the food on the exterior, but it melts in the mouth with saliva only, without pressure applied. Okay, so these are like Cheetos or Bigfoot, something like that. Soft cubes, the soft exterior but whole shape needs only the tongue and munching pressure to break it apart. So pear, banana, mango, they're doing this munching pattern or suckling pattern where it's like this. So they're not actually chewing, it's more munching and using their tongue. Eventually they go to soft mechanicals. It's soft exterior that holds the shape, and you need more of that munching, grinding pressure with your teeth. So pasta, cooked eggs, bread, and lunch meats. And then eventually you get mixed textures. So you're using 2 textures from above the hierarchy. And then finally you have hard mechanicals where you actually really need to bite down and chew those foods. So these are the ages for typical children where they should be. But when you're working with your autistic children, of course, do not move down the hierarchy unless they've progressed from the ones before. And also, if your child is not eating any solids at all, which tends to be the case sometimes, you want to work on making the liquids or the purees thicker and then chunkier, and make sure you're using different colors and different flavors that they'll accept. And then eventually you can mix in some meltable hard solids or soft cubes and mix it together, and eventually decrease the amount of liquid that you're using.
Okay, so I'll be going into picky eating and what it is. The more, professional name is selective restrictive eating. So these kids are usually the ones who are having challenging times with eating for up to 2 years of duration. And these patterns are mostly with kids having a strong preference towards specific foods, including textures, taste, how the food is prepared. They may have a very limited variety of the foods that they eat, and it can go up to about around 20 to 30 different types of food. They do not like trying new foods. They often refuse to eat the right foods or the right amounts. They get more upset by their parents rather than their peers. So sometimes, they'll have a harder time eating with their parents versus when they're eating with their peers. They like to have their special meal served. So the whole family might be eating one thing and the child is asking for their own special meal in the family table, when they might not eat, in different contexts. So, the best way to work with kids with picky eating is to do food chaining or incorporate sensory play. So I'll go into that next. So what is food chaining? Food chaining is when you're starting from what the child specifically likes to eat and slowly changing the character of that food little by little, whether it's by the texture or whether it's by the shape or maybe even the color. So, and I found that it's also very helpful if the kid, is explained what that change is, or they're even part of the process of changing that specific shape or texture. So I'll go through one example. So if a child is only liking potato chips, because it's a hard, crunchy texture, you don't want to start off into something mushy right away, which would be a regular banana. That's the end goal. But if a kid is stuck on that specific texture, don't start off where it's the complete opposite, because the kid will push it away right away. So the chain goes into first plantain chips, because they're similar in color, still crunchy. And then it'll go to banana chips, because the end goal is maybe trying a fruit, so a banana. We will go to freeze dried bananas, cold, different temperature, similar texture, but may get a little more mushy because it's not a chip. And then it can go into frozen banana slices, which is definitely a little bit more, mushy than the freeze dried banana. And then the end will be a banana. So, therapists who do feeding with kids, we try to slowly get them comfortable, gradually have them go through this food chaining process so that, they're familiar, they're comfortable, and they're slowly willing to accept different stages of the food that they used to like in the beginning. And food chaining can be a bit of a slower process, but it's very important to be patient and follow throughout, because there is definitely great results if, you're following through with, the food chaining process. Behavioral feeding problems. So, a lot of the common things with kids during, feeding time is that they will not eat and they'll want to play. They'll want to watch TV. They'll want to move around instead of sitting at the table and sitting for their whole meal time with their family. They don't like their food being presented in one way or the other. They're, throwing the food. And for us, I think the one thing that we do is really just try to understand, why are they behaving like this? What is causing them to want to get up, move around? Are they needing that sensory input? Are they anxious because, they're in a place where they're uncomfortable with the food that's around them? Or, is the environment too loud for them? Is the family conversation too much for them? And as Karina mentioned earlier, you have to pick and choose your battles. If your child is eating more when they're alone, then let them have their own time to eat. And if it's a productive feeding time where you're trying to get them to be more comfortable with food, or a different texture of a food that's, making them go out of their comfort zone, just know about what your kids might be uncomfortable with and try to change the environment so that they're more willing to participate and engage, rather than being in that fight or flight mode of wanting to run away from the situation. If they are doing it just to be behavioral, then you can use a behavioral approach, like using positive reinforcement, a reward system. You can have a star chart, and every time they try something, or they, are willing to explore the food, you give them a star, and then they have the reward of, having something that they really like, maybe TV time, or maybe a type of food, or just a reward that they know what the end goal is and what they're working for. And using the steps of the feeding hierarchy, which I will go into. So sensory play. A lot of teachers or parents will say, don't let the kid play with food. That's not the right manners to have at the table. Well, kids who have a harder time, who have feeding difficulties, as a therapist, I will say they need to play with their food. They need to explore their food. They need to understand and be safe with what they're putting in their mouth. So these are examples of how, we do sensory play. We do let these kids play with their foods. We make it fun. We put cars in there. We make different shapes, different, things like animals, where they're in an environment with different foods. The pudding is mud, the raisins and the mountain can be mountains, or, just the broccoli is tree. Like, you're letting them become more familiar with the food, and they might be more prone to wanting to interact with the food. So, for example, a lot of kids might not even touch the food. Oh, a broccoli? No way, I'm not going to touch it. Or I don't want to go anywhere near something slimy. I don't want to touch it. Well, if you put a car in it, maybe they will touch it, and maybe they will be willing to play with the toy. And there's always a reason why we use these type of approaches, which I will go into next. This is the feeding hierarchy. So this is a sensory approach in how we get our kids to be comfortable with the foods. So the example I always give parents is, if someone asked you to put something repulsive in their mouth, like a tarantula, they will say, no, I will not even touch the tarantula or be comfortable with it being on the same plate, in front of me at the table. Sometimes that's how our kids feel. They feel like you're asking them to put a tarantula in their mouth because they're not, they don't want it. Whereas in different countries, people do eat tarantulas because they are exposed, they're comfortable, they know that this is something that other people eat. And it's just a difference in how we perceive the food. So now, how can we get our kids to eat the food and become comfortable with it? There's different stages of how our kids can interact. So for example, the first stage is being able to tolerate the food, even being in the same room as you, being on the same table as you, and being on the plate when you're eating. The second stage is to interact with the food. That's when, you can use your toy. You can have them maybe just use the utensil to pick it up and scoop it, put it in another. They don't have to necessarily touch it with their hands. The third is smelling it. So getting them to, use their nose to explore how it smells. What does it smell like? Does it smell good? Does it smell bad? Like just talking about it. Are they comfortable with the smell? The next is touching it. So, having it touch it with their fingers, having them use their hand, have it be brushed on their face, giving it kisses, having it touch their lips or their teeth. That's the stage of how our kids become comfortable with even interacting with the food with their body. And then the last stage would be eating it. So even with eating, there's different stages. So they can lick it first, bite it, spit it out, bite it, maybe hold it in their mouth for a few seconds and then spit it out. Bite it, chew it, and then spit it out. Chew it, partially swallow, chew, swallow, and drink. And in the end, they will chew and swallow independently. So, we are sometimes mistaken of, oh, these kids just need to be able to eat it right away and they should be okay with it. And then sometimes these kids will be throwing up, or sometimes these kids will be traumatized. But these stages are the ways that kids can be comfortable with trying different foods, exploring it, and then ultimately getting to a point where they're eating it independently. So this is a video of one of our kids. He is a autistic boy. He's a child who came in with feeding concerns because he was only eating a specific brand of biscuits. He was very particular about what color of food he wanted. The stimming behaviors that he enjoyed was spinning. So I incorporated a spinning toy into our session. So I'll play the video to let you guys see, and I'll explain the approach a little bit deeper. Good job! Good job. Ready, set, go! Ready, set, go! All right, let's flip. Ready? Miss Grace's turn. Good job! All right, let's flip. Ready? Miss Grace's turn. No. You do. You do. Good job! Ready, set, go! So I'm using a sensory approach where, first of all, there's different types of food on his plate. So there's an orange. I think there were different fruits. There's stuff that he likes. Puffs was something that he did like because it was, that brown color and a crunchy texture. And because he would only eat, I believe he ate apples as a fruit that he liked. So we used applesauce. So I was trying to get him to try a texture that wasn't hard, but still using something that he did enjoy. So we chose applesauce. Kids really benefit from modeling. So this kid has a hard time, he has a difficulty with praxia. So he has a hard time, sticking his tongue out by just giving that verbal prompt. So if I'm saying, oh, it's my turn, and I, model with the spoon, stick my tongue out, you'll notice that he looks. And then in the beginning, he's kind of like, no, I don't want to do it. But then, I give him a little bit of time and I suggest it again, and he's receptive. It's not forced. I don't forcibly hold his head to put the spoon on his tongue, but I noticed that he was willing to try it. And that's when I, gave him the lick. And, we're using this SOS, the food hierarchy, to have him explore the different texture, and also giving him the toy that he likes, the stimming, the rotating toy that he's really motivated and into, to make it fun, to make that, session less anxious for him, where he's in a comfortable environment to explore food. Karina?
So let's skip this. I think you covered everything really well in the last section. We're running out of time, so let's just jump to the end. Okay, so I don't know what's up with those little red streaks. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. I know it was a lot of information, but I hope you all learned a little something. So just please remember, you know your kids the best. You are their biggest advocates. You might have to teach their speech, occupational, behavior therapists, teachers on how best your child learns. But remember, you are their biggest advocates. Also, please keep in touch with one another. Join Facebook parent groups, listen to the experiences of autistic adults, talk to one another, read, research, and of course, listen to your kids too.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I know you all enjoyed our presentation as much as I did. It was very informative and well done. So if there are any questions, just click that raise hand button and I'll acknowledge you and we can get started with the question and answer section. We don't want to keep you here too long since it's a little bit after 7, so you can just, we'll take a couple questions for maybe the next 15 minutes and then wrap up. Go ahead, Janice.
Okay, good night, everybody. So I was in the last session and I was one of the parents who was, trying to find out more about how to get my child to eat. He is going to be 4 next month and he does not eat any solids. No, I listened to the entire presentation, but I'm not exactly sure still what to do next as he only eats liquids. And whatever I try to give him crushed food and stuff, he doesn't want to try it. He's very reluctant, and if you try to force him, he throws up. So just some advice as to what I could do.
So has he been to a GI, gastroenterologist?
No, he has not been.
Does he throw up liquids as well?
No, he's fine with liquids. Just whenever you try to give him anything that he doesn't want, he'll force and throw up.
He will swallow it and then throw it up?
Yep.
Okay, so that could be a GI issue. If there's throw up involved, I usually recommend it's good to just rule out any other things going on. He could have difficulty swallowing. It could be a swallowing issue. So the ENT, or I'm not sure, speech pathologists do this here as well, but they might have to do a swallow study on him and see how the food is going down his throat. He might be swallowing the food incorrectly. So I would say you could do that. That's one way. Also, does he refuse the solid food before it gets to his mouth? Or is he willing to take it, but he just throws it?
No. He does. He does not want it any at all. I don't think he has never ever chewed anything.
Okay.
I've been trying with him a lot, but what I noticed that he likes is like if you give him the snacks like Pringles and stuff, he likes them, but he'll just lick it off and then throw it away. Okay. So it doesn't actually throw it. So we're at the point now where I've gotten him to start biting it, but he's not chewing it. He bites it and then throw it out.
Okay, so there's in that developmental food continuum, there's meltable solid. So I'm not familiar exactly what you guys have in Jamaica, but we have like there's these Gerber puffs that we have here that they're small and you put them in the mouth and they melt. So he gets used to just putting foods in his mouth. Even if he cannot manipulate it by chewing, it'll go in his mouth and then it'll melt. So anything that would melt in his mouth, a cracker even, any type of saltine cracker, small pieces, and thicken the liquid. So if he's drinking only milk right now and juice, you can give him purees and then start to make them thicker. Will he have purees right now, like baby food purees?
Yeah, no. Well, I tried him with the fruit sauce. Is it a fruit sauce? The one that comes in the pouch?
Okay.
I tried him with those. He doesn't like it.
Have you tried different flavors, different brands?
I have. What I find is that they're not as refined as the yogurt. He loves yogurt, so I constantly have to be buying yogurt. I try to do the purees myself, and I just think the texture is just off. It's not as refined as the yogurt, so he doesn't eat it. So once he tastes it, he just spits it out.
So what if the yogurt has like little pieces of like strawberry or I don't know, any other fruits in?
He spits it out.
He'll spit out those little pieces?
Right, he takes them out and throws it out.
Does he use a straw?
He does use a straw. Yes, he drinks from the boxes.
Okay, get rid of the bottle. We'll start working on a straw and have him drink his liquids through a straw and eventually work on using it thicker as well. Like when he can look at the spoon and realize, okay, this is thicker than what I'm used to, he might kind of be put off by it. But if you use a straw and a cup, then he might assume, you know, anything in this cup is a liquid and he'll work on drinking it from that too. And then eventually you can make the liquids thicker.
Okay.
It's a slow process, but you gotta start somewhere and then eventually build it up. Does he put other things in his mouth? Like will he mouth toys and?
No.
Nothing.
He puts nothing in his mouth.
So he's probably oral sensory avoidant. So he doesn't like anything in his mouth. He doesn't use a pacifier. He doesn't like his teeth brushed.
When he was younger, no, he didn't like it. He was not receptive to have his teeth brushed, but now he uses an electric toothbrush, and he uses it just fine.
Okay, so then he's not that sensory avoidant. So I would say you can put so you said that he will lick and kind of suck other foods. You could also put yogurt like on a carrot or something like that and get him used to just mouthing the carrot, putting it in his mouth, exploring, and just get used to putting things like that in his mouth.
Yeah, that sounds like something that he would probably do.
Right.
And what you mentioned too about the soft food that could melt in his mouth, I probably would have to try and get those. I think he might do that because he likes the snacks so much, because he likes like cheese puffs and cheese tricks and those kind of things. I'm thinking probably he would be more receptive to those as well.
Okay. Does he like coconut water?
No.
No? Huh. I was going to say, so if he did like coconut water, coconut, like the thin, like nice soft pieces of coconut jelly you could put in the coconut water too, yes, and get him used to, you know, getting some texture while he's drinking the coconut water.
No, he will not drink it.
So just yogurt and water?
Yogurt, juice, water. I make porridge for him, but I make it very light so he can drink it from a bottle.
Okay, well, like I said, first up, get rid of the bottle. Work on straws. Bottle at he's 4?
He's about to be 4, yes.
Yeah, get rid of the bottle. Definitely get rid of the bottle. Work on a straw. And like I said, you might want to follow up and see if you can speak to a GI. Grace, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think you covered all the bases. I think, first you want to make sure physiologically he's not having, any issues with like reflux or something like that. And then go through our PowerPoint slides and see how you can change up the food slowly so that he's becoming more comfortable with the idea. And I think the carrot with the yogurt and like you mentioned, the puffs that he might be more receptive towards trying and exploring in his mouth. I think those are all great ideas to start off with. And then, you can slowly go into the hierarchy, the food chaining process a little more as you see that he is more receptive towards some things over another.
Okay. Earlier in the presentation, you also mentioned a word. I don't remember it. Hyperlexic. I don't remember what it was.
Hyperlexic.
Hyperlexic?
Yes.
All right. And you're saying that these are for like kids who gravitate towards letters or words.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. So I mean, they could have an obsession with letters without being able to read, but that's if they do have an obsession with letters, they might be able to read earlier than, you might not have taught them how to read.
I noticed that with my son because he started reading at 2.
Right.
I didn't even realize that he could read. He just started saying words.
Exactly. So that is his strength. So use that, write down everything. If you want him to follow a direction, write it down.
That's what I've been doing, because he's, well, obviously he's not doing so well with communication, but in order for me to like help him to say things like, I want this, I don't want this, or help me please, what I've had to do is I write everything down on cartridge paper, and like, especially for that, the help me please that I just worked on. Like, he usually needs help with the light switch or in the fridge, so I write it and I paste it on the wall beside the switch or on the fridge. And if he's having trouble or, screaming, that sort of thing, because he's frustrated, can't get what he wants, and I go there and touch it and he says, help me please. And now he's doing it without being prompted for other scenarios. So that is what I've been using to get him to tell me what he wants.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, Cheryl, you can go.
Good night. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My biggest problem is my son is also a renal, separate from being autistic, he's also a renal patient. His kidneys weren't working when he was born. And so nobody really picked up on the autism until like years later. So whenever I take him to the doctor, he'll be adverse towards stethoscope, because of the trauma that he went through, because he keeps getting constant UTI almost every month for the first 2 to 3 years of his life. So now what's happening is, in terms of eating, he'll be prone to eat dirt, anything off the ground. Sometimes he'll throw his food on the floor and eat it. It got so bad. He had fits up to 8 months ago. He's just eating dirt from the garden. I had to get somebody to concrete it all off just to get him to stop, because it got bad, because he was even getting ringworm from it. And we can't, even though I always say, okay, we figure he was vitamin deficient or something, we try and give him vitamins, he'll start taking it and then he'll just stop. We have painkillers because of the renal issues. He would, but if he gets a chance to get some of that medication, he just throw it away. He's just adverse to anything that is good for him.
Is he only
eating the mouth putting anything in his mouth is he puts anything strange in his mouth, and because of that he end up between ringworm, hospitalization, and we just can't get him to stop.
So that would be an eating disorder, not a feeding disorder. That's called pica, P-I-C-A. So pica is when kids, so this happens with autistic children and non-autistic kids, where they'll crave and chew things that don't have any nutritional value. So dirt, paper, ice, even things like that. So that's more an eating disorder. So I think you would have to follow up with a psychologist for eating disorders. What has your pediatrician recommended?
Well, I don't know if there's a psychologist here to deal with autistic kids.
See, somebody else said that
the pediatricians are more following up on his renal problems, and not as I said, because the renal problems supersede. It took us some time to realize that he was autistic. By the time we realized he was autistic, it's hard to look at anybody. To be honest, I don't know. The pediatricians here are not at the university where I'm going, are not all that versed in how to deal with autistic kids. They're just dealing with pediatric medical problems in general. So I don't know. They can't help me there.
Cheryl, if you could message us directly your number, we can have somebody contact you tomorrow and see if we can maybe source someone who is versed in terms of treating pica, especially in children with autism. It's a little bit different than non-autistic
Or
kids.
regular, right.
Yeah, so you can just direct message the clinical department and with your contact information, and we'll get in contact with you tomorrow to see if we can help source someone for you.
I also want to recommend, so you said specifically he really likes dirt, and somebody in the group chat or in the chat said their child likes soap. Try to find something that is similar to that texture to replace it. So dirt, I would use like crushed up Oreos, maybe just the black parts, and crush that up and see if he'll eat that instead.
That's an issue because he likes salty stuff and not sweet stuff. That's another. I think that's what I spin out. Yes, all for salt. Also, he like Lay's, Pringles, that sort of stuff.
Okay,
but sweet, not.
That you like eat dirt.
Huh?
Yes, you must get the Oreo. Yeah, kids.
I'll still try that. I mean, but he's just tending towards salty snacks rather than so for fries. That's how that he's all for fries, and he should not have been fries because as a kidney patient, they're not supposed to have a lot of potassium, but he tends to be craving things that are high potassium, and that's a huge problem for him, physically or internally with his kidneys.
Right.
All right.
Hi, good night, everyone. I have a question.
There are persons with their hands up, so they've been waiting for a while. So you could just indicate, and we'll get to you after we get through the next couple persons or 5 persons with their hands up. You can put your hand up, and we'll cut off after you. All right.
Okay. I might go back to work if but I'm gonna have my husband ask the question. Okay.
Okay, sure. Melonia, put your hand. You can go ahead.
Hi, good night. So 2 quick things. The first, well, let me say this first, but you can answer afterwards. I would like to know what your opinion is on Gemini. I'm not sure if you may have heard of it. That's something that I'm trying with my child because I wasn't able to find a speech therapist. So I would like to know what you think about that. I'm not having a lot of success. As it relates to the presentation, from the sensory issues you mentioned, it sounds to me like my child has some tactile and oral issues. He's pretty similar to the first lady, I don't remember her name, where he initially didn't want to swallow anything firm. Now he'll eat like raisins, banana on certain days. So he'll have a banana today, and for the next week he won't touch it. But maybe it's something that you said, maybe each time I try it, it's a different smell, flavor, texture, or something. So I'm thinking because based on what I identified to be his issues, the oral and tactile sensory issues, when he goes to therapy, there's a session where they rub him down and they brush him down his legs and arms. And I'm wondering if that is the kind of thing that he needs, or is there something more specific to address his sensory needs now that I'm able to identify specifically what they are? What do you think?
So they're probably doing sensory brushing, which is a protocol that helps improve tactile defensive behaviors. So are they doing it 3 times a day, the brushing? Or did they teach you how to do it at home?
They recommended it, but initially it wasn't working for me and I didn't follow up. When he goes to a 2-hour session, for one day he'll have a 2-hour session, and I think maybe like 15-20 minutes out of that session they'll be doing what they call sensory and that's what I see them do. They kind of massage him, rub his legs and arms, and they use a brush sometimes.
Right. So if your child has tactile defensive behaviors, meaning that he's aversive towards touching different textures, the brushing protocol is a very commonly used protocol, but it's a protocol that's mostly effective if there is consistency, and the frequency of it being used during the day is about 3 times a day. So, I think if they're doing it in the clinic 1 time a day, I don't know how much the child is going to be benefiting from the sensory protocol, because the effectiveness is really, based off of how much they're getting it throughout the day. But if, I feel like you're asking about how it's going to affect his feeding and his restrictive diet, I'm assuming based off of certain textures. So I don't know if you were able to recall from our slides, but we also use this approach where sometimes, kids the sensory brushing protocols, only the limbs, like the arms and the legs, but when you're trying to get them to be less defensive orally, you want to incorporate oral sensory strategies like vibrating. There's something called a nook brush that it's like a little vibrating tool that you want to slowly, gradually get them to be comfortable with. Like Karina mentioned in her presentation, it might just be for 1 second at first, and then slowly it'll go to 10 seconds to maybe 30 seconds. The sensory approach is mostly incorporating play. So sometimes, like if the kid is aversive towards a certain thing, whether it's like a hard texture or something like that, I'll incorporate it like a song that they like. So, or a game, like it's, and then you want to also model it yourself. If kids are very aversive, you want to make sure that they feel like you're in it with them during the play. So, having you'll be like, oh, mommy's, putting on lipstick with the carrot. Now it's your turn, like kind of making it playful where they're not anxious about, oh my gosh, I'm going to get something close to my face and I don't want to do it. But if you incorporate, something fun with it, they tend to be less defensive and a little bit more receptive towards what you're trying to introduce to them. So I know that the tactile defensive treatment approaches are mostly not really, really effective for oral defensiveness. So, you want to incorporate the sensory approaches that are specific for feeding, like in the feeding hierarchy ladder that we showed you, so that you're, focusing on the child being more comfortable with putting things specifically in their mouth. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
so yes, so what you're saying is that because of his tactile sensory issues, he would need more of the brushing and rubbing than what he gets from therapy, the few minutes that he gets per day from therapy, right?
Yes. So yes. So sensory brushing does affect tactile defensiveness, but I think you were specifically asking about his oral defensiveness, correct?
Well, he has both. Based on what you taught me just now, I identify him having both. Like,
Right.
for example, when I try to brush his teeth, I literally have to hold him down. And I didn't realize that this was that. I thought he just didn't want me to do it. And you
Right.
mentioned something about putting in his mouth that vibrate. I didn't get the name clearly.
It's a Nook brush, NUK. So those brushes, they're little vibrating tools that you can have the kids, it helps. That vibration is giving the child proprioceptive input, and that proprioceptive input, it'll help them become more, to help them process that input and be regulating for them, not as aversive. But then you want them to be comfortable with it first. So, having it brush their cheeks first, having them kiss it first, and having it lick it first. And then slowly they'll start to explore it and be able to put it in their mouth and really get comfortable with that vibration to help them with their oral sensory system.
Okay, noted. Thanks. Any opinion on Gemini? Do you think it's something I should continue pursuing?
We do not know what that is because we are in Florida. What is that? Is it occupational therapist?
It's a speech what do I say? It's found. The website is gemini.org, I think, GEMIINI, and it aims to teach them speech. So pretty much it mouths words. You'll see the person's mouth, inside the mouth, like a X-ray thing. See how the mouth moves. They'll do it slowly, so you hear the words. See how you form the letter. See how you form the words. They'll show you things, tell you to jump or skip or clap, and ask that you follow. It's pretty much a video. I've never had speech therapy, so I don't know exactly what happens there, but it's similar to trying to teach a child to talk.
Okay, I mean, so I'm not aware of a lot of these programs that you guys probably are more aware of, because you are seeking, you know, the online therapy route, since resources are limited over there. But from what I can tell, I'm looking at the website now. They use discrete video modeling. It's for speech delay. I mean, yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't be good. Especially if your kids like looking at screens, or they're screen motivated. And you said that it's keeping them active and stuff as well. I feel like
Well, he doesn't always participate, and the reason why is that it costs. It's a bit costly. So I feel like if I could be using those resources to for something else, that would better serve him, because they're convincing me that maybe I need to be doing more, but he doesn't really sit and watch it. And they tell me that even if he's not watching, he's learning. And I don't really have any proof that it's working. So I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to decide whether or not it is something that I should still be investing in.
Well, I mean, I definitely think especially autistic kids do better with in-person treatment. But if that is, you know, not something that you don't have available, I think, you know, anything is better
For
than
6
nothing.
weeks. That's more.
Yeah, I think anything is better than nothing. But I mean, also, if they're doing it for hours, we do speech therapy for an hour max. And if the kids can't handle an hour, we do 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So I definitely wouldn't say, you know, if he's not paying attention, to just let it run and he's still picking up the information. I wouldn't say that's correct. So use your judgment. If you really think it's not benefiting him, then I don't see why you should keep paying for it either, though.
Okay, thank you. We have 5 more persons with their hands up. I'm gonna ask you guys to keep your questions concise. I understand that you have a lot you want to know and find out more about, and we'll try and have other opportunities to do that, but we do have to wrap up shortly. So you can go ahead. Caprice's iPhone is the next person.
Hi, good night, everyone. So I have 2 questions. One, in respect of apraxia, do you have any suggested intervention? And 2, my child, in respect of brushing her teeth, she doesn't want to spit out. And so that's the difficulty I'm having. Any suggestions on how to help with that? She doesn't really have any issues in terms of eating. I just want to say quickly to encourage persons who have been having difficulty. Up until age 4.5, she didn't eat anything at all, any solid food. She was just having porridge and liquids. And then she just started eating. So now she eats everything. So, you know, there's hope.
Okay, that's nice. So apraxia is very, very complicated. You want to start off with teaching syllables first. So instead of focusing on the very specific sound, like the B sound or the M sound, you want to focus on syllables. So first you want to work on one syllable, consonant, and then a vowel. So me, mo, my, by, hi, like that. And you want to, you know, make sure she's looking at your mouth. And you want to incorporate other communication as well. Like I said, speech is not the only means of communication. I know it's the hope, but you really do need somebody more specialized in speech to help them with their speech when it's apraxia, because it's motor planning. It's a little more complex than just look at my mouth and copy what I say. So if she's not able to get therapy services for her speech for apraxia, I do suggest working on other modalities as well. If she's going to You can work on her speech as well, but you still want to give her a way to communicate. So use a communication system like we had mentioned before, sign in, picture communications, an iPad app, something else. And use that website that I had mentioned, teacherspayteachers.com. You can look up apraxia and find a ton of resources on there.
Okay, thanks. She does speech therapy online with somebody in the States, but it's not, I don't think it's really focused on helping with the apraxia, which I think that is something that she struggles with.
Well,
so I don't know, I'm going to have to.
Tell them you're paying good money and you want to focus on her apraxia.
All right, thank you. About the toothbrush, the spitting out, that part of it.
Great.
I think, you kind of have to figure out why she might not want to be spitting it out. Is it because she likes the taste of the water with the toothbrush, or, is she thirsty and in the moment she just, impulsively drinks it? I would say the best approach would be maybe brushing your teeth with her, modeling it for her, spitting it out with her, using a social story about toothbrushing and explaining why we spit out, giving her a different option, like maybe drinking, if you're thirsty, you can drink water after brushing your teeth, but it's kind of dependent on what her reasoning behind it is. But she just might not understand that that's a process of like the steps of brushing your teeth. You can also use a visual schedule. So, did you, put the toothpaste on your brush? Check. Did you brush your teeth? Check. Did you get your water? Check. Did you spit it out? Check. Are you all done? Check. Like giving the sequential order with visual aids can be very helpful for autistic kids so that they, are aware of what is expected of them when they're completing that specific task.
Thank you very much. I think that's very helpful for me. I think it's really a situation where she doesn't know that she's supposed to spit out, because from she started brushing her teeth, we just couldn't get her initially to spit out. And that's now the routine for brushing her teeth. But no, we have to at some point get her to spit out. So right. I'm going to try that. But thank you so much.
No problem.
Really quick, can I jump in? For everybody that does want to talk and, we might not get to it today, I have a website called speecheatlearn.com. You can email me at info@speecheatlearn.com. I'm putting it in the chat. I will do one-on-one consultations. I'll have more time over the summer, so you can email me and we can work that out as well.
Okay. Castell, you can go ahead.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. The question that I have is that, so my son, he's 5 years old. When I compare him with his peers, as it pertains to speech, I know that he kind of has an issue with expressing himself. He understands very clearly. He can speak clearly if he speaks slowly. However, I realize that there's an issue in expressing himself. Like if he's trying to tell you, for example, what happened at school today because something bad happened or something like that, like you can't really tell what he's saying because he's all over the place with his explanation and the words don't seem to make sense. So I wanted to find out how I can improve how he expresses himself so that we can know what he's trying to say, especially if something is happening that at school or if something happened and we don't know what happened, and he should to provide some information to better to understand him. Do you have any tips for that?
So that's expressive language is very broad. So in this situation, you're telling me he's having difficulty recalling information from an experience, or you're telling me he has difficulty with the organization of what he wants to say, or he has difficulty explaining his feelings. So those are all kind of different things. If you want to work on him telling you about his day, or if something happened at school, I would say like after a Saturday or a Sunday where you've been with him all day, at the end of the day, work on it together. So today I did this. I went to this. I was with whatever. It made me feel whatever. So you want to keep things very, very structured. And of course, since you already know what he went through, you can help prompt him. So I would say work on that every Saturday and Sunday that you spent the day together, and work on providing details, asking and answering questions. And then for emotional intelligence, emotions are very difficult for lots of autistic kids to understand. So that's something that needs to be taught as well. So this situation made me feel happy. This one made me feel embarrassed or shy or uncomfortable. So you really need to break down emotions to truly understand emotional intelligence.
Okay, so I think it's more of sentence structure.
Like
The
grammar?
middle. You like the grammar and putting the words together. Like you made 3 points. It was, I don't remember what the second one was.
The organization of what
Yes, that one. The
Okay.
organization of the sentence.
Well, I mean, that works the same way. Give him a structure. So today I did this, I felt this, I went with so and so. Give him a structure if he is kind of all over the place. Give him visuals. So if he can read or if he benefits from symbols and things like that, use a worksheet. You could find a worksheet on Teach Us Pay Teachers. Like I said, they have everything. And you can have him use that worksheet at the end of every single day to tell you what he did. Same thing about if something happened and how he felt. You have to kind of practice the same thing over and over and over until eventually he gets it. But grammar is something that, you know, we're kind of always learning. And, you know, he also probably has just a lot of going on at the same time. So getting him to organize everything he's thinking. So you could write down everything that he says and then tell him, okay, well, what is important or what is actually answering my question? And then go back and figure out what the
Yes,
important
I think he talks too fast sometimes. I think that may be part of the problem, because if he's saying something and you ask him to slow down, it gets a little better, but the organization is still kind of off. So I think maybe how fast he's trying to speak may also be an issue.
Okay, so have him slow down. If he also, like we said, a lot of sensory things going on too. So if he's really, really excited and moving a lot, it might help to have him, you know, squeeze something while he's talking. That'll help him pace his words a little better. Even tapping slowly while he's talking. You want to have him slow his rate down as much as possible.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Tamika, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, so my son is 5 years old. We don't have an eating issue with him. Rather, he eats a lot, but that's not our concern. He has a very good memory, but he repeats a lot. But now he has a fascination with speaking a second language, which is Spanish. So we will say something to him like the word eat in English, and he will say come here in Spanish, or we may say orange if you would like an orange, and then he will say naranja. So we don't speak Spanish, but he has taken a fascination to the Spanish language more than the English language. So how do we go about that form? Because we don't understand what he's saying unless we try to translate or we pay keen attention to other stuff that he's doing. Then we'll say, oh, that is what he's saying, and that's what he's saying back to us, and that's the words that he meant. Yeah.
So a lot of children, autistic children, have special interests, which is what we call them. Like I had mentioned the kid that loved astronomy, and he could tell me anything about astronomy. And when you bond with them over their special interests, I mean, they really, really appreciate that. And, you know, that's the thing that they love the most, and it's a bonding moment. I've never met a child actually that just picked up a whole other language and is, you know, very insistent on using that one. But that's great. I think it's time everybody in the house starts learning a little bit of Spanish. You know, I had mentioned before, we have to accommodate to our children accommodating to us. Of course, we want them to speak English as well. But I think it would be a good bonding thing to kind of learn Spanish together. I mean, if he's learning it through a TV show or something like that, you know, sit there, watch him, repeat things that he's saying. You can say, oh, naranja, okay. And then you look it up, oh, you mean orange, but at least acknowledging him as well. You know, you're reinforcing, okay, you want him to say orange, but you are understanding, you know, you're validating him and understanding the things.
So we should not take it away then.
No. Do not take away special interests. These are things that make them happy. We wouldn't, you know, take away the internet from you.
Okay, and he has a full fascination with Play-Dohs. So whatever it is that he sees, because he doesn't speak much to you, what he does is repeat, or he refers to himself in the third person. So he will say, if he wants something, he will say, what Zayden wants orange, or Zayden wants juice. So he won't say I, even though we say I, and we say I, or ask him to say it with the singular and not the third person. He only refers to himself in the third person. If he cannot do that, then he will try to make it with Play-Doh, or make a slide, or make his bicycle out of Play-Doh to indicate that is what he wants to do next. But the speaking part of it, to get him to be there, he refuses to do it unless it's in Spanish.
Okay. So pronouns are like, that's a very typical difficulty for kids with autism. Names and pronouns. I have, you know, 10-year-olds that still use their name instead of I. That's just how it is. It'll come eventually. But just keep reminding him, like, you know, have him touch and say I. Okay, so I want whatever else. Or like I said, use visuals too. So if he's reading, I want my bicycle, have him write it down and then point to each word. So I want my bicycle, like that.
Okay, and he doesn't like to write. Is that a thing for them?
Yep.
He doesn't. Anything that has to do with a pencil or a crayon that indicates he's going to write a sentence or do his schoolwork, then it's a tantrum going into a meltdown.
What about, is it all pencils, all writing?
Well, at their level there, it's all pencils and writing for the basic school level there here in Jamaica. So they do a lot of writings and stuff. He doesn't like it. He refuses to do it. So what his teachers does is send the work home to us for us to get it done.
All right, so that's a lot more work. Well, I don't know, try different, you can, you know, get a pencil with his favorite cartoon character on it. You can get those pencil grips that are soft and maybe they feel like Play-Doh.
Okay.
And he could use that,
yes.
And that would make it more fun. You can have him use pens and markers and things like that at home, so that he just gets used to, you know, writing and makes it comes from more of a positive experience before he goes back to school and it's, you know, this negative experience of work. But try to create a better experience for him. I think he would really like those pencil grippers that are
the
soft.
grippers. Okay.
Right.
And one last thing, he throws a lot of tantrums at school, but when he's home, we have a better control of him. So they call us almost like every single day for us to keep him calm or get him to, he just goes off. And the word no seems to be a trigger for him. So even if you say it in a sentence, we're going to transition into something else. No, you cannot have this anymore. Then it's a whole meltdown. It's a whole historical screaming and kicking and hitting, and everyone is at risk there.
Okay, so I mean, there's probably a lot of things. If it's just being denied something that usually triggers him.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, try to avoid the word no. If the word no triggers him, try to avoid no. So instead of, like you said, we're going to transition to this room, instead of no, you can't go to the playground, we're just going to transition over here instead. or have them use behavioral approaches. So first, we're going to go to this classroom, then you get to go to the playground. So if no triggers, try to avoid no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. We have two persons that please make your questions as concise as possible. We do have to close off. Patrick, go ahead.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much for the time. I just like to quickly add that to the mom before, that what we do with our daughter when we want her to get her to do something that she doesn't want to do, we reward her with her favorite things to do, or favorite stuff like she likes to do. That helps. I don't know if that would work for you. But in my situation though, like our daughter, she has a huge vocabulary. She just repeats a lot of words, but she has issue with context meaning. So I'm just want to find out, like, do you have any suggestion as to how we can help her to contextualize the words that she uses? Not sure if the suggestion that you gave earlier would work for us. So I just wanted to hear your feedback on that one. That's it for me.
Like understanding the definition of a vocabulary word?
Right, like she will use, she will just use words, right, and she doesn't understand like what the word, like let's say, some words after a while she will get it, but like she just keep repeating a lot of words and she doesn't understand what the words mean, and so we'll have to like help her to break it down. Or even when she's at school and they will give her stuff to do, like she may not understand what false is a little bit clearly. She will hear false or true, but she doesn't understand what the word actually means in a contextual sense.
So, I mean, same thing you would do with neurotypical kids. You can explain the definition. Try to explain it in a way that you would use it. And then use it as much as you can for the rest of the week. Use it in every context you can so that she can understand the context that it's used in. And like I mentioned before, there are some kids that don't understand, they learn language by phrases, not word for word. So you might need to model a bunch of different phrases that she can use it in and context that she can use it in before she understands what the actual word means.
Okay, thanks much.
You're welcome.
Yannick, you can go ahead. That's the last question.
Yeah, so it's her husband. So I what's happening is we've had our first child. He's just 3, but the doctors kind of diagnosed him as that, and we're grateful for all the info he gave us. So we're gonna try some of those things. But one of the things that we're going to be trying, that we just wanted to get your professional opinions on, is a treatment that some of our relatives abroad are suggesting that we come up and try to see if it works. It's called MERT. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it.
Grace, have you? How do you spell it?
MERT, M-E-R-T.
And what is it? Speech, occupational, or what exactly?
I don't think it has to do with well, it does definitely helps with their what's the right word?
Okay, I'm seeing it's magnetic e-resonance therapy, drug-free and non-invasive treatment option for autism.
Yeah.
No, no, I do not recommend this. I could go on about it, but I do not recommend it. There's no cure for autism. Anything that they say is going to go on your brain and just magically make the autism go away is not true.
No, they're not saying that it's going to make it go away. It's that it helps them to basically, for example, some kids have auditory issues where they're hearing, because of some hearing impediment, it's harder for them to understand things or make their brain, their hearing is not communicating with their brain, something to that extent. So what they're saying in that context is that they would have helped to stimulate a certain part of their brain that's either dormant or overactive, to help, and it helps. But it was just something that we wanted to ask to see if you guys knew anything about it, and if you think it's plausible or anything to help stimulate parts of his brain that is hindering him.
I don't know. I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it, and I don't really believe that that would work. Like you would have to have like a very specific target of what you're trying to make better. I don't know. You'd have to really look at the research and everything. I would suggest going into a Facebook group with other parents of autistic kids and asking around from people that have actually done it and see if it was beneficial.
That's actually where I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, from a
or
so
even autistic adults that have been through it and see if it was something that wasn't traumatizing to them or whatever. There's a lot of treatments for autism on the internet that are also cool. So just please do your research.
yeah. The only other thing is that he is very, I don't know how to do it. He doesn't sleep at all by himself. And I think one of the personnel said that we should try wrapping him. He doesn't like to be wrapped. So how do we go about helping him sleep?
So there could be a lot of different reasons why your child is having a hard time falling asleep. Is he sensitive to sounds? Is he not, in tune with his interoceptive system? Is he, waking up because he's having a bad dream, or he's, not tired? Is he not feeling calm before bedtime? So trying to find the root of the reason why he's not falling asleep. The best thing for sleep is usually to kind of change the environment. So, making sure that the tablet isn't given to him. He gets no visual stimuli for a good hour before it's bedtime, making sure he doesn't drink a lot of liquids before bedtime, making sure that the lights are dim, that there's no auditory input in his surroundings when it's time for bed. You can give him a visual schedule for his bedtime routine. So in the schedule, you can incorporate like deep tissue massages. You can incorporate, maybe like listening to calm music, reading him a bedtime story where he has a visual order of what to expect and what's next. But it's sometimes, some things work for other kids, whereas some don't. So experimenting, what can I change? But mostly I feel like it's just a consistent routine, changing the environment and kind of giving him a schedule where it's giving his brain the right environment, and just getting him calmer before bedtime is usually what's helpful. So figure out his body, what makes him calm, what makes him relaxed before bed, incorporate that into his bedtime routine and see if it helps.
The thing is, what makes him calm and relax is us. He likes to be near us, especially his mother.
Okay, so maybe always have, a bedtime story with mom before bed, or, you can like help him if he needs mom to fall asleep, then mom can maybe give him, the tight hugs before, give him the story time and then be with him until fall asleep. If it's the person, then I would feel like in the beginning, the goal is to have him fall asleep and then slowly, see if you can find ways to wean it off where he can be independent and falling asleep. But he's 3, you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's still pretty young, and I think it's normal for kids to want to be with their mothers before they fall asleep. But yes, I would say try to be involved, have the mom be involved in a way where it's making him feel safe and calm, and then slowly, as time progresses, find ways to like wean him off and get him to be more independent with his bedtime routine.
Yeah, that's what we're working on, because we changed the environment. We took him out of his other room and put him in another room, and that seemed to help, but he just keeps getting up and running into our room at night crying. Yeah. So
is it during the night or is it before going to bed?
During the night. So when he does go to sleep, he sleeps for maybe 2 hours, realizes that no one is beside him, gets up and runs into our room. We put him back to sleep again, maybe wakes up again another hour and a half. He does that at least 2 to 3 times, sometimes 4 a night.
Having bad dreams? you think?
He's not speaking, he's nonverbal. That too. So it makes it really hard to know what's happening with him.
Maybe try a weighted blanket. Maybe he's not in deep sleep for the duration of the night. So even if it's not like a tight sheet, but like a weighted blanket, they sell weighted blankets for kids, for like 3-year-olds. So you can also try that and see if it'll help him stay asleep throughout the night.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys for that active participation. Thank you, Karina and Grace, for answering all those questions in great detail, actually giving parents a lot of strategies that they can apply specifically to what's going on with their child. I know sometimes presentations can be general, and it's good to have the opportunity to get something very specific. I'm sharing the link again for our evaluation form. Please fill it out so that we can know like how to continue to support you guys in this process. And just to close off, you know, on behalf of the Care Center, we'd like to extend a warm thank you to our presenters again, as well as recognize our partners, Optimist International Caribbean District Childhood Health and Response Mission, that is CHARM, in helping us to really provide resources for parents and continue to try to meet the needs of our stakeholders. And finally, we appreciate you, our participants, for being here and for staying here and being so active. So continue to ask questions, contact us. Karina and Grace shared their contact information. If you need resources, reach out. If there are things that we haven't touched on that you'd really like a presentation focusing on, drop us an email and let us know what that is so we can try and help to continue to facilitate the conversation. So good night, everyone, and have a great week.